There's an ongoing debate about election observers at North Carolina polling places. And joining us with an update is Dr. Andy Jackson. He is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. Andy, you and I have spoken about this before. The debate really stems from the fact that the State Board of Elections is trying to change the rules. What are the rules now?
Well, the rules now, as based in state law, is that, and I'm going to talk about local observers here, is that each voting place can have up to 2 observers, election observers, from each party. And that those 2 observers can be relieved after 4 hours. So, for example, during early voting, if you have a 10-hour day, that would imply that you could have up to 6 observers, local observers, at a polling place per day. And you can multiply that by the number of polling places within the county. There's also county at-large and state at-large observers, and they have similar rules. But the focus here is on those local observers, because they're the ones that are kind of the bread and butter of this. They're the bulk of all the observers that observe elections in the state.
So 2 at a time, but you're allowed to replace people. The State Board of Elections wants to change that.
They do, and it's strange because if you look at the statute, it's clear that you can have 2 and that they can be replaced after 4 hours. But what the state wants to do is say you can only have 2 voting place specific observers per day. And they do try to say, well, this isn't really a change because you can still have 2 at a time. Well, it is a change because in a lot of counties, not all, depending on how many people you can get to volunteer for these things, you will have more than 2 at an early voting site especially, but also at precincts where you'll have people that'll come in the morning and then perhaps a different set of people in the afternoon. So that is common practice, and that's a common practice that this change in rules, if it gets through the entire approval process, will change.
Now, during the midst of this, there's now a House Bill 819 that would change the rules and I suspect add a lot of clarity and go in sort of the opposite direction of what the Board of Elections wants to do.
Yes, it will. What it would actually do is say that you could rotate or change over observers at will, essentially, so that, for example, they don't have to wait 4 hours to change out to 2 new people. Now, they still have to be people that are on a pre-approved list that was sent by the county chair of the party. So you can't just say, oh, we ran out of people at this site, let's just go grab a people and throw them in, other than these at-large observers that are basically serve that function. But you will be able to do this more often. It'll make things easier for local political leaders, party leaders to get their folks in and out. Like, say, somebody says, well, I can work, but I can only work during an extended lunch break. So, okay, I can put you in for 2 hours at that time and help relieve people. So it would make things easier, and it would certainly clarify the matter. Although, like I said before, I'm really having a hard time believing that it's not already clear as written in the statute.
You've written about this at the Locker Room blog, how many election observers should be allowed at polling places. There are 3 competing answers. So we have the current law, what the State Board of Elections wants to do, and what would be described in House Bill 819. For those who don't follow elections very closely, why is this whole issue of election observers important?
Well, it's important because it adds an element of transparency to the process. This is one of those issues that really should unite both parties. Both Democrats and Republicans, other parties, and even independent candidates can also do this. They have a stake in making sure that the election is run properly, that there's no unfair advantage to either side. And it's an important part of the process to have those kinds of people that are kind of jealous advocates for their side to be there and to be able to observe. They don't interfere. They're not allowed to, like, say, go up and bother people that are standing in line to vote. They just take notes and report what they find. And that's an important process that adds transparency to our election system.
If the General Assembly approved House Bill 819, would we be in a situation where the State Board of Elections basically got the opposite result of what it originally tried to get when it wanted to change the rules?
Well, it would be ironic if we got that, because clearly they wanted to put as much limit as they thought they legally could, although, once again, I think they're overstepping their bounds on this one. And if they ended up in reaction getting something where you would have more observers over longer stretches of time in aggregate than what they're currently going with now, it certainly would be ironic, and I think it'd be justified that they're getting the opposite of what they intended to get.
Based on your assessment of where things stand with the election rules, does 819 make sense, or should we stick with what we have already in the law now?
819 could make sense. I think that if this current proposed rule change by the state board eventually gets shot down by the Rules Review Commission, which I think it should be, I think the current law is probably sufficient. You do want to have things easier on election administrators, or at least as easy as possible. Having them have to keep up with, say, 10, 12, 16 people in some precincts or some early voting locations, although I don't think that would be common just because there's just not enough volunteers. Having a reasonable number that you can keep up with and know, okay, that's Lisa, she's observing, and who is this stranger? I don't remember this person. So I think the current rule is probably best, although having some flexibility, there could be an advantage to that as well for transparency. But I think if this gets shut down, then there'll probably be a lot less impetus behind H819, and I think it probably will go away if this proposed rule change goes away.
Well, we know as all of these developments move forward, one person who will be monitoring them and commenting about them is Dr. Andy Jackson. He is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.